Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and I was hoping that this first video of 2024, I would actually be broadcasting to you guys out there in the audience from the new studio space, the new location that I am currently setting up. But alas, I have been returned here to discuss this video for Sam Seder, because Sammy Boy and his crew have decided to go full crime denial to sort of mention my name while doing so, and I figured I might as well make fun of them and their inability to read charts, and of course, how they just regurgitate information that supports their theories about the world without even fact-checking it in the most rudimentary way. But before we do, thank you to everybody who signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform. This video from the Majority Report is pretty similar to the video that we recently covered from David Pakman about how crime is down. And again, I will put forward the same question that I put forward in that video, which is, of course, down compared to what? We recently had an undeniable, yet Sam Seder and Emma Vigeland both deny it, spike in crime in this nation. It was disproportionately felt in big cities. So a drop-off to higher than 2019 levels is technically down, but it would still be elevated since that drop-off is from the new baseline. But, you know, I only explained this to Sammy Boy on our little stream. I explained this to Emma Vigeland as well, and apparently they still don't get it, and they're going to not really understand what I was saying and not be able to repeat back my points in this particular video, which just goes to show you how garbled the leftist brain is. But maybe, just maybe, they have some data, they have some studies, they have some paperwork in order to support their positions, so I could be proven totally wrong by this Sam Seder video.
ATX Kid, good morning, MR crew. Hope it's a wonderful hump day. Thank you. Brian from Chicago. Crime is down, but my entire Twitter feed is full of videos of minorities doing crime. It's definitely not because I'm liking and commenting racist stuff. It has to be the George Floyd effect.
Should we cover that?
Yes.
We gotta.
Folks, we've covered this quite a bit. And at one point we had a debate with the real crime justice warrior. Or what is it? Actual justice warrior.
Or you did, and I also, he was kind of he was Tim Pool's backup from when I debated him. And Tim needed another person to help him out.
So right there, we got the name check. Thank you, person in the back who definitely remembered my YouTube channel's name. I really appreciate it. And Emma, I don't know why you're so weird about the Culture War podcast, whatever. It is always positioned as Tim moderating a discussion between two people. You wanted to argue with Tim, and I had no problem with you arguing with Tim based on whatever stupid things you wanted to argue about. Obviously, you weren't interested in getting into the crime debate, because every time you put forward a stupid position in that conversation, I addressed it immediately, and you wanted to move on to Tim's song, or the shape of Tim's beanie, or whatever the hell you wanted to talk about. So, relax. It's okay. I'm sorry I was there. I'm sorry I broke up your little piano recital. I'm sorry you wanted to be in the compound with Timothy all by yourself, but it is what it is. What happened, happened. We're just chill. Just chill, okay?
And the gist of our argument was he was saying that we have this massive rise in crime because of the so-called thing he made up called the George Floyd effect.
So a lot of people say that Sam Seder's a bad guy, Sam Seder's a mean guy, and all that, but honestly, I do not see it at all whatsoever. He just said that I made up the George Floyd effect, like I coined the term, and I will happily take credit for that, even though it's not the case, even though it's kind of just the Ferguson effect repurposed with George Floyd, you know, bigger Black Lives Matter incident, bigger problems in our country.
Which presumably caused all this massive reform and cuts to policing, or just demoralized police.
Or it's like broken windows theory, just re.
And to his point right there, it's not really an either or, it's actually a combination of the two. You have demoralized police, you did have funding cuts and other reforms passed in various states in the union that caused the police officers to leave. It is well documented that we have a dearth of recruiting, and in their particular absence, you ended up with a a spike in crime, specifically a spike in homicide, which actually spiked more significantly than violent crime. And it was 30% in the nation as a whole, 47% in cities like New York City, around 39 to 40% in Los Angeles, and other major cities saw bigger spikes that were ahead of the national average. But yeah, if you want to give me credit for coining the term George Floyd effect, thank you, buddy. I really appreciate it.
Or I think he was saying it was because of police reform and we needed to hire more police because of this. I don't know.
Okay.
But one of the problems I had with his premises, I'm like, well, crime is up, but it's actually starting to fall again. And it's also conceivable that the first pandemic that we've lived through in 100 years may have, tossed and turned society a little bit and created different pressures and whatnot. And that crime is going down. He's like, that is not happening. That is not happening. It's just a tiny bit. It's not below where it was. And look at what's happening at all the retail stores.
Now, honestly, on first watch, I thought he was mischaracterizing me more than I thought. But now that I watch it back for this video, I was saying that it hasn't gone back down to 2019 levels. This is actually a solid characterization from Mr. Sam Seder, even though he's doing that annoying voice, which may actually be his own voice. I don't actually watch his show all that often, but yeah, crime went up dramatically. It started to decline after 2021 in the 2022 numbers, which, by the way, we will get into a little bit later, but the decline was against the giant increase. That was the point I was making. That point has yet to be refuted by anyone, but whatever. Now he's going to move on to retail stores, which, again, we'll talk about as he talks about it. Don't worry.
And look at what's happening at all the retail stores. Well, CNBC actually looked at one of the biggest retail stories. That was when Target said that they were closing 9 stores because of crime to keep their employees and their customers safe. Now, we should also say that the Association of Retail Stores came out and said we had to amend our report on crime in stores and loss because it turns out that it wasn't really necessarily crime that we had this loss from.
So I've been waiting for somebody to mention this in a video that I actually wanted to respond to so that I could refute it, because I've seen this out there on the internet.com, and it's always 100% of the time mischaracterized in the same way that Sam Seder mischaracterized it. So the National Retail Federation, or the National Federation of Retailers, who really cares, did in fact amend their 2020 report, where they stated that something like 50% of the shrink was due to organized retail theft. Now, their amending of that previous report was just amending out the organized portion of that report. And anybody who saw that at the time, including me, never reported that 50% of the theft that was going on, or 50% of the shrink, was due to organized retail theft. In fact, I remember specifically having a direct message exchange with somebody who wanted to do a report on organized retail theft, and I sent them this report over, and I said, listen, their numbers, based on the surveys, you can compare the billions lost before the Black Lives Matter riots to after, but their characterization is quite questionable. And the reason I did that is because I knew that organized retail theft is actually a detective's determination whether or not this is an organized group. And what's actually important is what level of shrink is due to shoplifting or retail theft, and the organized thing is just something that is always going to be fungible. And in fact, what happened here in particular was that 2 different numbers were combined. The National Retail Federation conducted their survey as they did every year. They came up with about $94 billion in losses due to shrink, which is not theft. And they estimated in the same report that the majority report is pretending is discredited, that 37% of that was due to external theft. Then some guy testifies in Congress that $45 billion in losses, half of all shrink, this is where the number comes from, is due to organized retail theft. That gets plastered in the report, even though the actual data set that says something completely different is also in the report. So this was an obvious mistake to notice if anybody read the report, because both contradicting statements were initially in there. So what the NRF did was they got rid of that half of all shrink is due to organized retail theft, because they were also saying in the very same report that 37% of shrink is due to external theft, and both of those things obviously can't be true. Also, it was a complete outlier from their other reports that reported no such high percentage of organized retail theft as a portion of shrink the year before or the year after.
But here is this story about Target.
That was behind the closures.
Tyler, if Target was trying to prioritize worker and customer safety, they would have closed the stores that are still open. What my investigation found is that the stores that Target chose to keep open in nearby locations actually had way higher crime incidents than the ones that they closed. So what we did is I pulled public records from all the police departments that saw store closures. That was going to be in Seattle, Portland, New York City, and San Francisco Bay Area. And so what you'll see is that the stores that were closest to the ones that it closed had higher crime incidents in all but one case. So we have data on 21 stores. Only one store that closed had higher crime than the one that it kept open nearby.
So why were the ones that didn't have the highest crime the ones that got closed?
So there's a lot of factors that could be at play here. And, what's important to point out
Were they just underperformers?
That's what it looks like. Some of these stores had less foot traffic than other ones. Like the San Francisco store is a really great example. The one that they kept open was in the heart of San Francisco's tourist and shopping district, right there in Union Square. It's packed. And then the one that they closed was downtown near a highway. Homeless encampments had set up nearby. It had way less foot traffic. It was just a quieter part of town. And you can see that in different parts. And there was also some cannibalization.
But it wasn't that it had higher theft.
It didn't have higher theft.
It didn't have higher theft. The
Based
one
on-
in Union Square had higher theft.
Exactly.
Higher foot traffic, more people, higher theft, compared with the one in the relative backwater where there was more homelessness, where there was less foot traffic.
Exactly. And the reason why this is a story, a retailer can close there's a whole lot of business reasons why a retailer may close a store. But when Target made this announcement, first of all, it's not news when a retailer closes 9 stores, especially one of Target size. They do this every single year. But they sent out a big press release saying that organized retail crime was threatening the safety of guests and employees, and for that reason, they couldn't keep the stores open anymore. And if that was really the case, then they would have closed the other stores because those appear to be a lot more dangerous.
Okay, there we go. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. You have basically some executives trying to tell their shareholders it was crime's fault, not the fact that we just chose bad locations or whatnot.
So I like the fact that Sam Seder and the Majority Report crew decided to play this particular clip from CNBC. And of course, unlike most people out there in their audience, I actually watched the full clip because it doesn't actually tell the story that Sam and Emma and the whole crew are hoping that it tells. Now, of course, obviously, based on this woman's research, there are more incidents of reported theft at stores that were kept open with higher foot traffic versus the theft instances at stores that were closed that had lower foot traffic. And notably, there was one that had a very large homeless encampment near it, and it was near a highway, and there was just not a lot of foot traffic right there. And I wonder if at all those things could be connected in any way, shape, or form. But don't worry, Sam's got his explanation, and we'll hear his explanation, and then I'll play you the rest of the segment that Sam didn't play because they actually explained this. But let's hear Sammy Boy's explanation.
Some executives trying to tell their shareholders it was crime's fault, not the fact that we just chose bad locations or whatnot.
Now look, this should go without saying. In fact, you guys should already understand what was being stated in that CNBC segment. And to be fair, Target was kind of lying about trying to protect their customers and trying to protect their employees. Obviously, they closed the stores that were the least profitable. But is it possible, you should ask yourself, for a store to have lower raw number instances of theft, but be more impacted by each of those instances, thus theft and overall crime could be the root cause of why that store closed. Let us find out if that's even thrown out there in the very same CNBC segment.
Suppose if I were them, I could say, well, in some locations, maybe the crime is more of a threat because the locations are inherently more unsafe, like you described, a little bit more off the beaten path. And the other thing is if they're less profitable stores, then the theft, theft per sales per square foot or something might look a little bit different than just overall levels, blanket levels.
Now, look, this should not require an explanation unless you work, I don't know, at the Majority Report or in progressive media, but I'm going to explain it to you guys with simple numbers so that you can understand what is actually going on here. Let's say you have 2 different stores. We'll call them both Target because Target is the store that we're talking about, and store number 1 has 10,000 sales a month. I know Target wants way more, but trust me, keeping the number simple makes this much easier. here. And with that 10,000 sales a month, they have 60 instances of theft. Now, 60 instances of theft against 10,000 sales, obviously, proportionately, not that large. Pretty small percentage. We can all understand that. Now, let's say there's another Target store. This store is not doing so well in the sales. They have 1,000 sales a month, but they only have 30 instances of theft. Now, according to the analysis put forward initially by the CNBC report, that store with 10,000 sales a month with the 60 thefts has more theft instances, raw number of theft instances, than the other one. But we know, based on the proportionality, that each of those other instances, those 30 against the 1,000 sales, they tend to hit harder because they're a larger portion of the sales. This is all that was proved by the CNBC places, that stores that had more foot traffic to compensate for the elevated levels of theft remained open because they were still profitable even despite the theft, while stores that had lower levels of foot traffic, may have had a homeless encampment deterring people from going into that store, could tolerate less theft per their sales or per whatever measurement, obviously because those theft instances cut into their profits significantly more. That's all that was proved right there. That was it.
And the other thing is, if they're less profitable stores, then the theft, theft per sales per square foot or something might look a little bit different than just overall levels, blanket levels.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Kelly. And also, it's important to point out that my data doesn't show the full picture.
Now, to give credit to the CNBC reporter, she acknowledges that her data is not the whole picture. She acknowledges what was put forward by the other reporter, that obviously those theft instances could be doing more damage to the stores that are already underperforming comparatively. And that could be the thing that puts it over the top, causing that store to close. That's all in the original segment, conveniently left out by Sam Seder and the Majority Report, but you just saw it for yourself. Now let's go back to Sammy Boy and his celebration that Target is totally not getting stolen from, and they're just closing stores because they don't know what we even think about it.
There it is, ladies and gentlemen. You have basically some executives trying to tell their shareholders it was crime's fault, not the fact that we just chose bad locations or whatnot. And this story just kept getting propelled, and we saw it in the context. Everybody was dipping in and using it. There's a crime spree across the country. There's retail outfits. This is why we're having losses. This is why we got to raise prices.
Now, when Sam says everybody was using it, that's not exactly true. Even though I did talk about retail theft and I did show you individual cities' data, the reason I did that, instead of showing you national data or going to the National Federation numbers, except when we were talking about the dollar amount, is due to the fact that only a few cities in this nation actually break down their theft into the category that gets us a retail theft number. So I'm often a fan of showing you guys this chart from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. This is a chart of theft of all different categories of New York City, which shows you that overall property crime is down and or flat, but retail theft is up 77% since the Black Lives Matter riots. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's get into Sammy Boy's charts.
Put up the other graph. And now the FBI has put out more information. Do the whole piece by Kevin Drum. Because you can see this here. Violent crime in the United States from 2012 to 2003. This also is the same, not just for murders, but other violent crime. 2023, we only have up until through September. So this is, we don't have October and November in these statistics.
And I'll just say, you can't really see the y-axis part there, but it says rate per 100,000 people. That's what the numbers on the left indicate.
But the bottom line is that violent crime is down, and we should say other crimes are down as well, carjackings and whatnot. But
so there's a few things I want you guys to understand about this chart so we can avoid confusion. As Sam said right there, this data only goes up to September 1st, which is interesting because David Pakman was at least able to provide data up to October 1st, but whatever, that's not really the main issue right here. The main issue is this dotted line right here that shows crime descending all the way down, lower to levels that we've never seen throughout our entire history. 2023. This is just indicative of the fact that the data only goes up to September. It is not actually the drop. The chart is kind of made deceptively in that way, among other deceptions in this piece that I happen to find with rudimentary research that Sam Seder seems to be incapable of.
The raw data, here it is. According to the FBI, through September, violent crime is down 15% in big cities and down 8% overall. Murder is down 25% in big cities, 16% overall. Property crime, which was so important to crime justice warrior, is down 6% this year. Burglary is down 12%. Both property crime and violent crime are on track. And to be fair, we're not there yet, but they are on track to be at their lowest levels in, you ready? Not 1 year, not 2 years, not even going back to 2019, but 50 years.
Sam is so excited about this, and I just want to point out that we do have the homicide data. The homicide data is the most reliable data that we can get from reporting, and homicide actually nationwide went down with the completed numbers that Sam could have had access to at the time that he recorded this video by 12%, which is a good thing. And by the way, in the previous year, 2022, homicide went down about 7%. So let's just do some quick maths on the homicide issue, and then I'll move on to this chart, and specifically that 50-year claim. Now, as I've told you a million times on this channel, in 2020, we saw the largest year-over-year increase in homicide in American history. It was about 30%. And this was followed by a 6% increase from that new elevated baseline in 2021. And in 2022, we saw a 7% decline. And now that we have the new numbers for 2023, as of right now, we saw a decline of about 13%. So let's do some quick maths so you can understand that homicide is still up despite what Sam Seder is trying to tell you. Now let's make the numbers really simple. Let's say there were 100 homicides, then you had a 30% increase. That gives you 130. Then you get a 6% increase on top of that, and that is 137.8 homicides. So over 2 years, that's about a 38% increase from our original baseline of 100. Now we got to take out 7%, which gives us about 128.1. And again, even though it's 12.8% in some of the reports, we'll just round it up to 13. It will be fairer to the Sam Seder side of the equation, and we deduct that from our baseline right here. Now that gives us a grand total of 111.5, meaning that homicide nationwide is still elevated by 11.5%. Again, the trick that they always use is they pick a point, they say crime down from that point, but the question that you need to always ask yourself is down compared to what? Compared to the 2019 levels, we are still elevated. This is the point that I made to Sam Seder. This is the point that I will continue to make. I will acknowledge that we're seeing a good trajectory for the nation. It could be worse. We could be going up, but we are still elevated, and this is the problem that I'm identifying in the nation.
Which was so important to crime justice warrior, is down 6% this year. Burglary is down 12%. Both property crime and violent crime are on track, and to be fair, we're not there yet, but they are on track to be at their lowest levels in, you ready? Not 1 year, not 2 years, not even going back to 2019, but 50 years. 50 years.
So first of all, I just want to say I absolutely love this. I love this in every possible way, in ways that you cannot possibly understand, and ways that I'm kind of a little bit ashamed of, because the way that Sam says this, the way that everybody in the peanut gallery is so excited for the nearly 50-year claim, is just so beautiful to me, because I'm actually aware of the crime data from 50 years ago, and I know that this claim is objectively stupid. It's idiotic. Only a buffoon with a team of people who only deal in confirmation bias and never fact check anything would present this in the way that Sam Seder decided to present this. Because if we go 50 years ago to the 1970s, what you'll find out is that each and every year on this chart, not just 2023, every single year, 2012 through 2023, is lower than every single year in the 1970s. Now, if you'll remember, Emma the Buffoon made sure to tell you, because their graphics department cut off part of this chart, that this chart was violent crime per 100,000 residents.
And I'll just say, you can't really see the y-axis part there, but it says rate per 100,000 people. That's what the numbers on the left indicate.
This is not unusual. This is how we measure crime. And as you can see with this chart, which I pulled up a better copy so you could see both the X and the Y axis, shows us that not one year of any of the years shown, 2012 to 2023, did we see the violent crime rate go over 400 incidents per 100,000 residents. Not one year here at all. Now, by comparison, and we look at these charts, and I know they look a little bit different, but if you look at the sourcing on the bottom, they're both from the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, and what we could see, except for maybe 1970 itself, which by the way has crime at in and around 398 instances of violent crime per 100,000 residents, every single year is over 400 instances per 100,000, meaning that crime every single year here is already lower than 50 years ago, being the 1970s. Now, even though there's no chart here for property crime, I decided that I was going to go out of my way and look this up as well, look at the 1970s levels, and it turns out there were over 3,500 instances of property crime per 100,000 residents in the United States of America for each and every year throughout the 1970s, and we actually dropped below that level back in 2004, and we never even came close to reaching that again. And by the way, this shouldn't be surprising because if you look at the data, violent crime never spiked in the same way that homicide did in the first place. In 2019, we had 363.9 instances of violent crime per 100,000. That moved up to 385.2 in 2020, then to 377.6 in 2021, and then for 2022, it was at 369.8 instances per 100,000. So it's a spike, but it was nowhere near the 30% spike that we saw in homicide in 2020. This is why you would see headlines saying murder is up to a high point over the last 10 years or maybe the last 25 years, depending on which city you live in, but violent crime is relatively unchanged. And the same is true for overall property crime, obviously with the caveat related to possible retail theft and definitely related to Grand Theft Auto. Also, as I pointed out in the David Pakman video, we are actually transitioning from the Uniform Crime Report to a new reporting system from the FBI based on the National Incident Reporting System database, and because of that, we're seeing less and less law enforcement agencies participate in the UCR. As I pointed out in that video, the drop-off from 2021 was around 16,000 agencies versus 14,000 agencies, aka 2,000 law enforcement agencies no longer reporting under the UCR, and this has caused complications with the UCR data that we will address at the end of this video.
Not 1 year, not 2 years, not even going back to 2019, but 50 years. 50 years.
So what we find out right here is that we had an idiot that decided that he wanted to deny crimes and he was going to put out an article and he wanted a bold statement. And in that bold statement, he didn't want it to say 3 years. He didn't want it to say 10 years, not even 25 years. He decided that he was going to make his bold statement as big and round number sounding, but not too far in the past to the point where you guys get confused out there in the audience and start to question it and peg it in and around 50 years. But the problem is, he didn't look at what the crime rates were in these specific categories that he chose to highlight 50 years ago, because had you done that, you'd realize how asinine this comparison actually is. But thank you, Sam, for saying it so boldly and so confidently with your whole entire team not fact-checking a single thing about it.
50 years. Now, what I take from this is that there was an anomaly. Now, unless at the end of 2022, there was some structural change that happened that had happened back in the end of 2020, let's say.
People realize how much they love cops, I guess?
Well, my point being that if there was a George Floyd effect and all these cops got demoralized and there were less cops, then for crime to, and that was the reason why crime shot up, for crime to have dropped, you would have had to see some counter effect.
Yeah.
That would have been the anti-George Floyd effect, where cops were rehired in the same numbers that they were supposedly fired, even though they weren't. And that's why crime has dropped so dramatically.
What I love about this is that after Sam reads that 50-year number without questioning it at all, despite the fact that it's completely ridiculous and I just refuted it, he then starts shooting off at the mouth about police officer hiring versus police officer firing or actually leaving the force. Not a lot of officers were actually fired, and he pretends like officer levels did not decrease, even though that is clearly and obviously the case. In fact, the Department of Justice actually put out a report in 2023 of April that shows exactly what Sam is saying didn't happen happening. So according to this analysis, which asked law enforcement agencies to report their staffing levels in January 2023, what they found out was that there was a 4.8% decline in force numbers compared to 3 years ago. This would be January of 2020, before the pandemic, before the Black Lives Matter riots, and all of that. So right there, as you can see, plain as day, we are down in terms of officer staffing from January of 2023, which is the beginning of last year, to January of 2020, which is pre-Black Lives Matter riots, pre-pandemic. We're down about 4.6% nationwide. Obviously, some departments, like the LAPD, are down around 10%. The NYPD is also down in significant numbers. But as you can see, despite Sam Seder being in denial of this fact, police officers are down nationwide, and that coincides with a dramatic crime increase. But it actually goes a bit further than that, because Sam said we would need to see officers being rehired or officers being hired at increasing rates in order to explain, he calls it a dramatic crime drop, but the slight decrease in the rate of increase that we saw in the last 2 years. Well, let's look it up for ourselves and see if that's actually the case. So in the year 2022, police departments saw 35% more sworn officers hired than in 2020. Now, 2020, outlier year, pandemic, Black Lives Matter riots, etc., but this is actually 5.6% more than in 2019. Now, despite this fact, staffing levels do continue to decline as a greater number of law enforcement officers resign, and 47% more officers resigned in 2022 than did in 2019. Now, by the way, they're actually counting resignations and early retirements in the same bucket right there. So let's be clear. Sam is wrong about officers resigning and leaving the force. That did happen. It still continues to happen. And he's also wrong about the fact that police departments aren't trying, and in some cases increasing their level of hiring in response to this, which we also see by the data.
The anti-George Floyd effect, where cops were rehired in the same numbers that they were supposedly fired, even though they weren't. And that's why crime has dropped so dramatically.
So Sam could talk all smugly right there, but everything he just said is wrong and not supported by the facts.
Or what may have happened is that we've been on a steady decline of crime in this country for decades now, and we had this really strange event that completely twisted society around.
And made people desperate.
Maybe drove people crazy in some instances. Sure. I'm not saying like clinically, but like pressure, and then they're looking like I can't go to work, or like this work that I have, they're willing to subject me to death, or 1 million people have died plus in this country, and nobody seems to give a crap. So why can't I go steal a car? Who knows?
So 2 things about this portion of the clip that make me laugh. First and foremost, Sam has no understanding of the criminal mind, and I find that to be hilarious. He thinks that people were looking at the CNN ticker, the number of people died as reported by CNN, and thinking, wow, all those people died, therefore I commit Grand Theft Auto. That's the most ridiculous and stupid thing I've ever heard. But then again, when you think about Sam Seder's position, you think about how he grew up, you think about how Emma Vigeland grew up, you understand how this could make sense to people like them. Number 2, I never said that the pandemic, in fact, I specifically said the opposite, didn't have an impact on people's behavior and isn't probably a contributing factor to crime. Now, this hypothesis is not a very strong hypothesis, considering that when the pandemic actually started, crime plummeted dramatically, and it only started to spike after the Black Lives Matter riots and after reforms were instituted and all that. But, it probably was still a factor. It probably still had some impact. You had all these people home that could have been working, could have been going to school and all that, and their lives were upended. So sure, that was a contributing factor.
What the mental processes were, but that it was a function of this pandemic. And now we have crime dropping, assuming the past 2 months have stayed on course for the rest of the year, to 50-year historic lows.
Again, he just asserts that 50-year historic low number with so much confidence, even though, again, I've already shown that the 1970s, 50 years ago, were higher each and every year than every year over the past decade in the two categories that he highlighted.
In fact, retail theft has been lower this year and then in most of the country than it was a few years ago, according to police data. Some exceptions, including New York City, exist, but in most major cities, shoplifting incidents have fallen 7% since 2019.
Since 2019, pandemic, the George Floyd effect, or whatever it is you want to call it.
So what I love right here is the confidence that Sam Seder says that with. He's like, pre-2019, pre the George Floyd effect, or whatever you want to call it, shoplifting is lower than in the United States of America. Now, first and foremost, I want to point out that this study that they're referencing, which comes from the Council on Criminal Justice, is not of the entire country. In fact, it only includes 24 cities, and the only way they managed to keep retail theft down to pre-2019 levels is by excluding the New York City data set, which actually shows shoplifting is significantly elevated, even amongst the cities that they chose specifically for this study. And what a collection of cities these actually are. I'm going to put them up on the screen for you, and I want you to tell me if you notice any cities that might be missing that we might talk about from time to time on this channel. So when you look at this chart for yourself, what you find out is that A, it's from 2019 January to only June of 2023, and the bulk of the drop in shoplifting comes from cities that we almost never talk about when we discuss retail theft. St. Petersburg, Florida, down 78%. Again, who is covering looting and rampant shoplifting in St. Petersburg? We have St. Paul and Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, St. Louis, Austin, Colorado Springs, Little Rock, Arkansas, Chandler, Cincinnati, Seattle, Denver, Nashville, Chicago, which is one that we talk about, Memphis, Lincoln, San Francisco, one that we talk about, Chattanooga. Now, what you'll notice about all of the cities that I just named in terms of the decline in retail theft in comparison to their 2019 levels is that we've only ever discussed two on this channel, and there's only two on that list that you even hear about in terms of this particular problem, and that is Chicago and San Francisco. Now, to be clear, Chicago seems to have straightened out to a certain extent their retail theft problems in comparison to 2019. However, San Francisco, they're very low in their decline compared to that number, and this could be due in large part to the fact that their spike in retail theft actually had to do with criminal justice related reforms that predate the Black Lives Matter riots. But of the places that we saw increases in, we have Boston, which to be fair, we never talk about, up 8%. We have Raleigh, North Carolina, which to be fair, we don't talk about. Dallas, 19%. Virginia Beach, 19%. And the leaders are Los Angeles at 61% and New York City at 64%. So what we have right here is not a nationwide drop in retail theft. We have 24 cities arbitrarily chosen that don't include Philadelphia, they don't include Baltimore, they don't include Oakland, they don't include all these other places that we talk about frequently on this channel because the surge, by the way, is very much region specific. They include a bunch of other cities in order to counterbalance it to say that there's not a problem, and I believe it's done intentionally so. And to make matters even funnier, even with these groupings of cities, they still had an elevated rate, so then they took New York City out of it just so they could show the decline that they wanted to show. But Sam Seder's like, oh, destroyed, owned with facts and logic, even though he does not know what he cites.
And, we should also say, not only is this the lies that, Eric Adams told to get into office.
Now, what makes me laugh about this is that they cite this article that cites the study that I showed you, and he says that these are the lies that Eric Adams used to get into office, even though even according to that report in particular, New York City's retail theft was elevated. According to that report, 64%. According to the 2021-2022 numbers, it's actually up 77%. But Sam just says, oh, well, nationwide, that means everywhere in the nation. Let me not even look into it because why would I ever bother to check a source?
And a final point on this from me. Let this be a lesson in people's media literacy, because there were a lot of folks that just ran with this because it was being reported in outlets. But when you read the details, it's the trade associations and the corporations that are making these claims about crime. And so, you've got to, in the same way, I feel this way when we're talking about, Israel and Gaza more broadly as well. You have to analyze where this information is coming from and who is making the claim and if it's been independently verified by the source. I wish, honestly, papers were much more scrupulous about it. But at least people who were, on the left in a way, or supposedly left of center, that should be inherent. And so I was really surprised to see how many people fell for this crap.
Now, I love the fact that Emma Vigeland, in her arrogance, in her hubris, is talking about checking the origin point of her sources, as her and Sam Seder and this entire crew of people didn't check the origin, didn't check their own biases, didn't look into these numbers, because every single one of their reports that they're citing originated from some crappy left-wing blog with an obvious political agenda, and that's why they ripped these statistics out of their context. That's why they said something as stupid as crime is at a 50-year low, even though the data shows across the entire chart that was displayed in that article that it was below the 1970s each and every year, even with the crime spike. On top of that, they never once decide to maybe scrutinize the FBI data in any way, shape, or form, not even with the methods that are provided to us to look at this data in particular. Now, I've discussed this, but there was actually a big problem with the Uniform Crime Report in 2022. In fact, there was significantly less reporting of crimes to the police than there was in previous years, so we actually saw great disparities between what the Uniform Crime Report brought us and between what was provided to us by the National Crime Victimization Survey. And for many crimes, except for homicide, because victims of homicide aren't very good at filling out surveys, this is the better way to gather data on such crimes. And I want to show you the disparities so that you can understand what we're dealing with, because even some of the drop that we saw in 2022 could be down to the fact that we saw a significant drop in reporting, not an actual violent crime or property crime. Now, by the way, ironically, this report can also be found on the Council on Criminal Justice's own website, and thus they are the same people who put together that asinine report on the retail theft issue. However, this pulls data from the NCVS and the Uniform Crime Report and compares the two. And what we find out is that according to the Uniform Crime Report, and remember, these are often not that different and they're not supposed to be that different, violent crime fell by 2%. However, according to the victimization survey, it was up by 75%. And when we go to the categories, what we find out is that rape was reportedly down 6%. However, the NCVS actually had a 58% increase in rape. And by the way, I'm pretty sure these include sexual assaults as well. Robbery was reportedly up 1%. But compared to the NCVS, it actually was up 47%, and aggravated assault, which was reported as down 2%, was actually up, according to the NCVS, 104%. And the reason for this disparity is because 52% of serious violent crimes were reported to the police in 2021, compared to just 48% in 2022. This is a relative decrease of nearly 8%. And the greatest disparity is actually in the aggravated assault category. 61% were reported to the police in 2021, compared to 50% in 2022, a relative decrease of 18%. And what they cite for the reason why people aren't reporting these crimes is declining trust or increasing fear of the police. This is due to the George Floyd effect. Increased police response times due to the fact that many cities and localities are facing officer shortages, and other issues that I've talked to you about on this channel a bunch of different times. But all of that is thrown asunder by Sam Seder so he could take his empty, hollow victory lap, despite the fact that the data does not support his claim. But hey, that's just my opinion, and I want to know what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me making the first video of the new year. Till next time.